Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1971-74 Carryover League off-season. Just getting started. We got started last week by looking at who's being kept, waived, and retired as we began the trade carousel with the worst team, the team with the first overall pick in the draft, the Phillies. And we navigated ourselves through the first half of the league, 16 teams. These are teams that finished in third or fourth place a year ago. And beyond this, you've got 4 teams that barely missed the playoffs and then the playoff field. So the teams are going to start getting a little bit better, and the decisions might have to be more difficult as a team wants to keep its nucleus together. Also, the before and after. Again, we want everybody to get to 40202. That's the magic number. You keep 4 guys, you waive 2 guys, you retire 2 guys. That's what every team has to do. And going into this process, the numbers are going to be skewed a little bit based on who's on your roster. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a hitter or a pitcher. You can trade hitters and pitchers. It's just going to be largely random based on the talent in the league at the time. So that all gets fixed by the time the draft starts, as all teams will end up at the beginning of next year with 20 players, 12 hitters, and 8 pitchers. Let's see if there's been any more news in the trades since we left you last. Of course, there would be. Let's see here. We had got through the blockbuster trade of Baltimore and Atlanta. Ohio, Minnesota got rid of old third baseman. Giants got another token out of that Willie Mays Singleton trade by moving Singleton to the Expos. Up with Ron Hunt. And let's see. And then the White Sox picked up their center fielder, Ken Henderson. And now they have a choice. This could be advantageous for the White Sox because they can choose which Ken Henderson year you want out of 4 and pick the best one. And he has that for as many years as that card still exists. So that might help his career as he starts to tail off in production. That was a nice move by the White Sox, addressing center field and bullpen, getting Jack Aker as well. So let's get started now with Texas. They should be next, I believe. Yes, Texas Rangers, Team 17. They started the carousel at 20-21, just missing the playoffs in the round of 3 versus the Twins. Let's look at the end of the year, how it was 602-2. And here's the Rangers, 602-2. And that means 2 keepers they'd like to move. And they would be Elliot Maddox and Merv Retman. Now, Retman would probably have the best individual year of any of these players. That means Bernie Allen, Billy Canigliaro, Frank Howard, Maddox, Retman, and Bob Johnson. So why trade him? Well, because his value is at the highest it's going to be. His 1971 year with Baltimore hit 318. Back-to-back 318, 320 years for the Orioles team that went to back-to-back World Series. Baltimore, however, didn't have room for him. Just like they didn't have room for Frank Robinson. Because they had a speedy outfield of Don Buford, Paul Blair, and now Al Bunbury. So they weren't going to make a deal for him. Too expensive. Too expensive of a player. Elliot Maddox was on the trade block largely because he went from being just a utility player who was okay, versatile, but not particularly amazing at the plate, like a 250, 260 hitter. But he has an outlier year in 1974 where he hits over 300 for the Yankees and gets MVP votes, believe it or not. We can take a peek at that in a bit. So the Rangers do a smart thing and say, let's see what we can get. Let's get people on the phones, get the best offer, that kind of thing. And so it was a trade of Elliot Maddox, and he was traded to the Yankees for Danny Cater, which would have been, Cater normally had it's really funny, but Cater always had a good batting average in 69, 70, 71, but he starts to tail off a little bit with the batting average. And by tailing off, I mean under 300, like 270, whatever. Maddox is an outlier year in 74. And then Cater, the Yankees wanted to do it straight up, and the Rangers said, we're going to put him on waivers. We don't need Danny Cater. I mean, first baseman, we got Mike Epstein, we got Frank Howard. Why do we want Danny Cater on our team? We're just going to put him on waivers. So you have to fork up a token. So currency is what it took. The Yankees had the currency. They gave a token to the Rangers for Elliot Maddox. He can play the outfield and the infield. And then the other player, the next guy here, it was Merv Retman, and he ended up going to Arizona. A nice move for a team in an expansion division. You know, I applaud these expansion teams for making an expensive trade because what do they got to lose, you know? I mean, one of them's going to the playoffs every year. Colorado Rockies went 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Las Vegas has gone the last 2 years. Arizona builds their roster. They all have a different strategy, those expansion teams. Colorado is around power. Vegas is around pitching and defense, and we'll see that in a little bit. Arizona's strategy is batting average. And so Jim Lytle takes a dip from a 300 card to much lower than that. So that's why he's on waivers. And Retman, they asked for 2 tokens because they said, look, his 71 years is one of the best years in all of Strat, and that's coming up this year. For all we know, he could win the MVP. That's how good Retman's card is. And so the Rangers parlayed 2 draft tokens from Arizona. So shrewd trading for the Rangers, getting 3 draft tokens. They have the most draft tokens, meaning that as far as currency goes, they have the pick of the litter of undrafted free agents at the end of the draft next year. So they're more than welcome to improve their roster, improve their players internally. So that's a good situation. When we look at the Rangers, they go from 60002 to 40202 by moving 2 keepers for 2 waiver guys. And that is their math. Next team up was the Pirates, and they stood pat. And who did they stand pat with? We look at Pittsburgh at 402-2, not willing to make a deal. 2 kind of disappointing years. They're supposed to be in the World Series. But the guys they are keeping are Roberto Clemente, Al Oliver, Bob Robertson, Manny Sanguillen. Case closed, as I like to say. There's no reason to trade any of these guys or move. You know, that's your keepers, and yeah, you're not even answering the telephone. They're your guys moving forward. What Pittsburgh needs to do is simply play better. Just keep running back the players you have. Play better baseball. Get luckier somehow. I don't know. Like, get better dice. Go buy a new pair of dice or something. I don't know. But Pittsburgh just needs to get luckier next year because they've just really been bad luck for 2 years. All right, the Cardinals. They did a nice little move here. St. Louis Cardinals. Where are they? They started this process at 4-2-2 as well. But they weren't crazy about Julian Javier getting older, Bill Sedakis, Chuck Taylor, Ted Abernathy. And we know the Ted Sizemore era would come to the Cardinals via the Dodgers. And the Dodgers had too many keepers, and it seemed to be a match made in heaven between the Dodgers and the Cardinals. In an interesting move here, the Dodgers and Cardinals made the trade straight up. And just like we've seen this before, the Dodgers said, we're not going to keep Julian Javier. We're going to waive him because we have Davey Lopes coming up to play second base. So we want a draft token. And the Cardinals said, you ain't getting one. Sizemore and Javier are comparable players. You don't get a draft token. Worst case, you'll just cut Ted Sizemore and we'll pick him up off of waivers, or somebody will pick him off of waivers. Or we're more than happy to keep Julian Javier. So, sorry Dodgers. It's a straight up trade between a young Sizemore and an old Javier. And if you want to keep Javier, you can. If you want to waive him, that's up to you. Alright. The Dodgers then actually made another trade here. Let's skip to them for a moment, because it kind of happened back to back. They started the process at 6-0-1-0-1, very similar to Texas. And we earmarked that Sizemore would be a trade, but a player of bigger importance is Wes Parker, who, though he's getting older, he doesn't have a place on this team anymore with Steve Garvey about to take a MVP shot at first base. Wes Parker is a switch-hitting, slick-fielding first baseman with decent batting average, not much power. But a team was going to make a deal to acquire him. And that team would be Las Vegas, who is quietly building a team of defense. We'll look into the roster in a little bit. In this particular trade, Vegas had a retiring player going to the Dodgers, and the Dodgers said, look, we want a token. A, Wes Parker is a heck of a lot better than Ted Sizemore, and B, you're giving us junk, because Art Shamsky doesn't even play baseball anymore. He's retired. So the Dodgers get a token from Vegas. But you see, Arizona forked up 2 tokens. So the teams in that Mountain Division are willing to invest some money now to make their teams better, because they're expansion teams. They can't do it otherwise, really. So this is an opportunity to get some really cool talent. Merv Retman on Arizona and Wes Parker on Las Vegas. Who's next? Oh, Detroit. Yeah, so let's go to the next move here. So after Pittsburgh and St. Louis, we have Toronto, and Toronto passed for the moment as they started at 4-0-1-0-3, and frankly, they were just going to wait and see who was going to go on waivers and might pick up a guy before that process begins to replace their keeper. So they just said, well, we're going to pass for the moment. We'll wait and see. Which brings us to Las Vegas. They start the process at 4-0-2-0-2. See where they started. Here's Las Vegas starting the process at 4-0-2-0-2, and they had to redo a lot here. John Bacabella was a keeper. They were considering a trade of Aurelio Rodriguez to the Detroit Tigers, because you know Detroit covets Aurelio. He becomes their third baseman. He wins a Gold Glove for the Tigers in '76. But he is property of Vegas, and Vegas might not want to get rid of him. They also have Ray Culp, who was a nice winner in 1970 with a nice card as a keeper, and also Tom Dukes. That's how it started, with Hansen and Torborg as waivers and 2 retirees. But Vegas decided to get creative. And let's see how they changed their team. We mentioned Wes Parker was one of the elements. So what else did Las Vegas do? Get creative with an expansion team here. Turns out Aurelio Rodriguez was not traded, but they did make a move for Detroit. I'll get to that in a moment. You see Wes Parker was acquired. Congratulations. They do hold on a Culp. And then the other move was getting on the phone with the Tigers, and instead of Vegas sending Aurelio Rodriguez to Detroit, Detroit sends the shortstop of Detroit, Ed Brinkman, to Las Vegas. So Brinkman and Rodriguez would be teammates, not for Detroit. They're going to be teammates for Las Vegas. And the strategy then is that the Tigers are planning to simply go with offense at third and short. They're just going to say, screw the defense. It didn't work last year. They had Clete Boyer, a one at third base. They had Brinkman. And we know that A-Rod and Brinkman just don't hit much in the 70s. And the Tigers are kind of cut from a different cloth. They're the Norm Cashes and the Dick McCullough as a great hitting second baseman. Bill Freeham's a great catcher. You got Gates Brown for another year. They got the great outfield. You got Northrup. You got Willie Horton and Al Kaline. So they're just going to find some bats to play third and short, not really too concerned with defense. And just maybe get like utility players for defense, late inning replacements. So Hansen is a wavered guy who really is on the edge of baseball and possibly could be pushed into retirement. Vegas had to fork up another token to get Brinkman, because Brinkman also gets MVP votes. Let's take a look at Baseball Reference for a moment, because I wanted to look at a few players we've talked about so you can see this. Elliot Maddox. Wouldn't think this. You wouldn't think it, but let's go to 1974, the year coming up. And Mr. Maddox has a 303, 395, 386, 781 OPS. He is 8th in MVP votes in 1974, which is remarkable for a guy who had 466 at-bats for the Yankees. 8th in MVP voting, 3 homers, 45 RBIs, 6 stolen bases. You kind of are just curious about the MVP voting in the American League in '74. Burroughs, Rudy, Bando, Jackson, Fergie Jenkins, traded to Texas from the Cubs, Catfish Hunter, Rod Carew, Elliot Maddox. What? I say that again. Burroughs, Rudy, Bando, Jackson, Jenkins, Hunter, Carew. And there's Elliot Maddox, 8th on the list. Pretty wild, pretty weird actually, but yeah. And Texas took full advantage of that statistic to get some draft tokens out of it. Now, Ed Brinkman. Here's another guy with some interesting. We know about his great glove. Washington Senator, then he goes to the Tigers, is there through the early part of the 70s. But 72 playoff team. Gold Glover. So he's going to be a 1. Hits 203. A 538 OPS. 9th in MVP votes. I'm curious about that, just as I was about the 74 votes. Let's look at the MVP voting in 1972. Well, there's Dick Allen, Joe Rudy, Sparky Lyle, Carlton Fisk, Bobby Mercer, Gaylord Perry, Wilbur Wood, Louis Tiant, Ed Brinkman. Ahead of Mickey Lolich, Catfish Hunter, John Mayberry's first big year, he had 25 homers, Jim Palmer, Rod Carew. So yeah, folks, you get some outlier players, and they're worth a lot. And that's why you see Ed Brinkman, and that's why you see Elliot Maddox joining Retman and Wes Parker in this particular analysis. Vegas would also needed a retired player. Toronto got on the clock to get a waived player, and that's what Toronto was waiting for, just to find the next available waived guy, and they helped Vegas out. So these two expansion teams helped each other out right there. All right, let's go back to the list here. We see, since we've started, Texas is whole, as is Pittsburgh, as is the Cardinals, as is Toronto, and as is Vegas. So the next team on the clock is Milwaukee, and it's a little bit disappointing for Milwaukee. Sometimes you have assets and nobody thinks they're assets. And in the case of Milwaukee, they did have 5 keepers. And they would be, here we go, Jesus Alou, Jim Fregosi, George Scott, Jerry Royce, and Ken Sanders. Now they assumed that Jerry Royce there would be an interest in Jerry Royce from the Pirates or the Dodgers, 2 teams he would play for and play very well for, beginning in 74-75 for the Pirates, then of course later he's a star for the Dodgers. The trades didn't materialize for 2 reasons. Pittsburgh and the Dodgers had locked up all the guys they could keep, and they're not shopping for Jerry Royce this year. Next year they'd shop for him, but they're not shopping for him this year. So Milwaukee was in the position where Royce is still in the early 70s. He's not very good in 71, 72, or 73. And so they put him on waivers. So 4-0-2-2, Milwaukee just decides to punt on Royce since Pittsburgh or the Dodgers did not offer a trade for him. He may not even get into the league because, again, his stats aren't particularly fantastic before 1974. Let's take a peek since we've been taking a peek. That's the fun part we do with these analysis, folks. So here's 74. That's a nice year with the Pirates. So it's the Cardinal Houston period of his early career. His ERA is over 4, and he doesn't have a winning record until 73. This card might get into the league, though, with Houston. 16 and 13, 374 EA, and 279 innings. But it's a 138 whip. Because he's left-handed, he'll probably be picked up by a team. But frankly, it doesn't matter too much because the Brewers are happy with Earl Stevenson in the bullpen and McGinn and Royce. They're happier with their keepers, so that's why they didn't make a move there. All right, the next team is Atlanta. Oh boy, folks. They, of course, made the big blockbuster deal to get Davey Johnson from Baltimore. And they started the process. Even after the trade, it was still 7 keepers. A ton of keepers. They were only able to get down to 5. We'll see who they're not keeping anymore. Atlanta. It was Rico Carty, Billy Cohen, Gale Hopkins, Mian, Jarvis, McQueen, and Drabowski. And a lot of these guys, well, Hopkins was moved in the Baltimore deal. Cohen and Carty were in question. Cohen wasn't really attached to Atlanta anyway. Carty is somewhat attached to Atlanta, but he was injured and didn't play in 1971. Jarvis starts to flatten out performance-wise. McQueen's got a nice year as a lefty. He improves. And Drabowski's getting old. He's got to be 40 years old by this time. So the choices that Atlanta made is that they were able to trade Felix Mian, who had a great year. If you follow the past season, Mian went to the All-Star game for Atlanta. He and Maury Wills made a great double play combination. Speed, bunting, hitting and running. Batted 8th and 9th on a stunning Atlanta team when they would probably bat 1st and 2nd on most other teams. They found that Florida wanted him. So in a surprising move, Atlanta trades within their division, but they realize that Florida is at the bottom of the division. And I don't think adding Felix Mian is going to make the Marlins go to the World Series. They do get a draft token from the Marlins. And frankly, Florida's defense is historically horrible. I mean, they had 40-41 Chico Simone playing second base. They had 40-21 Jose Pagan playing third base. So Felix Mian will be a 2 or a 1 defensively. That should help Florida. So they'll fork up the token. And before the season starts, the Braves need to get rid of 1 more of their keepers and get a retired player. But there's time to do that. And the last team tonight would be Minnesota. Starting the process at 40301. Basically just needing to swap out a waived player for a retired player. They actually did that earlier in the draft when they traded Rick Rennick for Jim Ray Hart. So on the carousel after this, I think that is the last trade that was made. And that was last year. That one. So that's where we're going to stop tonight, folks. Gave you 8 of the teams that were on the edge of the playoffs, plus 4 of the wild card losers. Vegas, who won a division, lost in the wild card round. Milwaukee and Minnesota, runners up to the White Sox in that division, lost in the playoffs. And the Braves lost a tough divisional series to Houston. So when we do this again, we're going to get to the final 8. Cleveland, Houston, Boston, the Dodgers, the White Sox, the Mets, Oakland, and Cincinnati. And these moves are going to be significant. They have to be, as these teams are all trying to, find that missing piece, find that Willie Mays to the Mets, find that Frank Robinson to Cleveland, find that player that is going to make the difference in the 71, 2, 3, 4 timeline. Thanks for checking this stuff out, folks, and we'll see you next week.